I'm now joined by Dr Namane Dickson Masemola, Deputy CoGTA Minister. Minister, very good afternoon. I appreciate your time. Now, the South African Weather Service has issued a warning for light snowfall and a significant cold front moving across the country. How is CoGTA coordinating with local authorities to ensure readiness for potential disruptions, particularly in affected areas like the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal?
Well, a very good evening to you, and as well as a very good evening to all the viewers throughout the Republic. It is true that the South African Weather Services has issued a notice of possible inclement weather, which pose very serious threat to the coastal provinces and, of course, as well other places throughout the country. As the department working through our National Disaster Management Center and, of course, interacting with provincial and as well as local municipalities, our systems and our disaster management committees and structures are on high alert for any eventuality so that we can be able to intervene and save lives, but also to respond accordingly to any situation that might arise as a consequence of this inclement weather that has been, indicated through various media platforms for the nation, for the people in those identified provinces and areas in particular, to take serious precautions and make sure that they don't just be outside and take trips and travel long distances. We're basically indicating that we are more than very ready, but equally important. This situation requires even the people of our country to basically adhere to the notices of these weather notice that have been issued, for them not to take trips at this point in time, particularly in some of those areas. So we're asking the people of our country to adhere very seriously to these matters. Stakeholders in those areas where they have been identified to provide the required leadership to communities in terms of pushing the message across using all sorts of various media platforms, like we are doing it ourselves together with provinces and as well as local municipalities. So we're more than very ready to respond to any situation of whatever kind.
Now, Dr. Masemola, there seems to be a huge focus on potential travellers, on those individuals that might be affected on the freeways. But there are vulnerable communities across South Africa, communities that ordinarily would not receive snow, are likely to receive snow and may not able to cope with those situations. Just how prepared are you for them, and what efforts are being made to reach out to them before snowfall?
The disaster management centers in all provinces, and more especially in the identified provinces, they are very much combat ready, like I've said, coordinated by those command centers, also including the National Command Center from Pretoria. But the work has to be done on the ground. Those communities which might have not experienced most probably this snow and any other form of a disaster. The reason why it is important for us to engage even at this level, to push forward very seriously, so aggressively, information, it is for communities to know, and in areas where they might begin to realize or experience the snowfall or any other form of a possible disaster, they should be in a better position to alert the immediate authorities so that we should not take time to respond to some of those areas. But our systems are more than very ready, because we have alerted ward councillors throughout the places, traditional leaders, and many other social structures within our communities, so that in an event such an occurrence is experienced, they should be able to report such very quickly, so that our systems can be responsive in a much more aggressive and positive way to save lives, but also to make sure that our people are not necessarily subjected to very difficult conditions, like we have seen in the past few days when many people got trapped on the major roads of our country and other localities. We are not only focusing on the roads, but it's a comprehensive strategy to intervene and respond accordingly to any situation, to any disaster of whatever form as it might basically arise, not only limited to the snowfall and other related issues. So I could say that we have a very clear comprehensive plan that includes the South African National Defence Force. We are working very closely with the CSIR Space Agency, but equally important, as I said, communities and leaders on the ground, including our disaster centers in provinces and as well as in local municipalities. So there's a seamless operation that is about command and control so that we don't commit any mistake which might basically affect lives of our people. So we understand the right to life, and therefore the state, the government, has a very huge responsibility under these circumstances based on this phenomenon, which it is beyond our imagination, but we are not necessarily unable to respond accordingly in terms of the capacity of the state. So we're more than very ready to respond to this situation as and when it arises.
Now, something that is clear is that there are a number of lessons, Dr. Masemola, that have been learnt from what transpired in the last 10 days that's allowed you to achieve the state of readiness before snowfall hits tomorrow or the day after. What are some of the key lessons you think have driven the department's ability to react in the way that it has?
Well, we didn't expect very seriously the extent to which the snow fell. And as a result of that, our structures on the ground were not, they were ready, but not to the extent that we are at this point in time. But equally important, we have not been in a better position to basically, push very hard a message throughout the country and in those areas for communities and citizens to basically seriously take precautions on these matters, because at this point in time, some of those roads, the roads agencies, including provinces and as well as Sanral, we have taken very clear collective decisions to make sure that where people do not necessarily listen, we've got to close those roads, because it would be in the interest of government to save lives, to make sure that people don't just travel unnecessarily as and when there are these instructions that there is a possibility of a serious crisis as a result of this disaster, given the inclement weather. That is one point. But second point is about strengthening a collective provision of leadership, not only from local authorities to the province up to national government, but also within communities. And that is the reason why we're basically locating all our collective endeavors and efforts, not only within the systems of government at the level of centers, but within communities as well, because democracy ought to be practiced at the local level, and therefore leadership by councillors, leadership by ward committees, leadership by traditional leaders, because all of us, we do have a collective mandate of providing the much needed leadership at this point in time. So these are some of the issues that are very key, including the extent to which we've got to involve other state agencies, like I've referred to the CSIR Space Agency, but also put on standby the South African Defence Force and other capacities within the state. So we've activated almost every capacity that we have in government to respond accordingly to this situation based on the lessons that we have learned in the past. But going forward, I think what becomes extremely important, it shows that those major roads which were hit by snow the past few days, we've got to possibly create satellite centers along those roads so that in an event of this snow going into the future, we don't have to pool resources or instruments far from where these disasters are happening. So we'll have to be combat ready along major roads of the country so that we have got temporary centers that at a particular point in time they could be reinforced by others that will come from elsewhere, but on site there's a need to make sure that we do have those centers that we can put as ad hoc centers so that we can quickly respond to some of these issues. So we have learned quite a lot, and we are quite sure that our capacity, theoretically, experience-wise, is growing. And as South African government, of course, CoGTA, working together with provinces, we are more than very certain that out of all these lessons that we've learned in the past few days were occasioned to basically confront any situation of whatever kind with regard to these problems of weather inclement.
Dr. Masemola, I particularly like your confidence, and I suppose you have the fact that whilst one life is always one life too many, but the tragedy around the last experience with inclement weather and a first-time experience for many in the department was just the one individual who suffered as a result of hypothermia. But let's speak to the future and the challenges that climate change brings, because potentially there could be greater devastation that's nothing like we have seen before. Is your department thinking forward, thinking ahead, or are you working with other agencies and departments to look at what possibly global warming looks like in the next few months or in the future for South Africa?
Climate change has become a reality that is confronting the family of humanity globally. And the extent to which global policies and decisions and frameworks have been taken for nation states to basically adhere to a series of processes of decarbonizing our productive capacities within the energy production so that we basically reduce the emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, given what the scientific reports and evidence are pointing, that nations of the world have to work very hard to basically decarbonize their productive capacities, precisely because of these problems of global warming. And as South African government, broadly at the policy level, I think you are quite aware that there are serious endeavors within the energy space based on our mixed energy supply policy that we are exploring different alternatives on how we can provide renewable energy sources through providing a green infrastructure for purposes of decarbonizing our power productive capacity. I think that is at the broad level, policy-wise, what we are doing as government. But equally important internally, as CoGTA and through our systems, we are reviewing our disaster management policy so that after having learned quite a lot of lessons from other countries throughout the world, how do we therefore then go into the future? Build a very resilient, responsive, and the appropriate capacity required at our level. So the policy review basically talks to many proposals that we're actually processing at the level of discussions, as you are saying, what are we preparing for the future? So we're looking at ways and means of making sure that almost every locality, particularly local municipalities, including districts in the country, depending on how ourselves as government we're going to be finalizing the actual implementation of that policy. But the intention is to make sure that we put appropriate capacities from local municipalities, district municipalities, with the appropriate technology that is so much required. And that is the reason why the science institutes within government, the CSIR, geoscience, including also the science and technology department and space agencies, they have been brought closer to all these processes so that as we finalize this policy in terms of the institutional capacity, the finances, but the technology that is so much required as well, it should move with the modern times because this global warming is here, it's part of our lives, and it is up to us as leaders in government representing millions of South Africans that we must put systems in place, policy-wise infrastructure, the institutions so much required, so that at any given time, we can be able to deal with a global phenomenon which is basically threatening the family of humanity. And therefore it requires...
You definitely have your work cut out for you, Dr. Namane Dickson Masemola, Deputy CoGTA Minister. We'll leave that conversation there, sir. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us.